Welcome to the Bug Hunters Café.
Hi, Marta. Bojan? What's going on with the cafe today? I had to park down the alley.
Temporal stabilizer is on the blink. It's overdue for a system flush.
Is that what you two are doing? Fixing the temporal stabilizer?
We're trying. You know how brake systems in cars have hydraulic fluids?
Yeah.
This model of temporal stabilizers uses cheese sauce for that.
Cheese sauce.
Cheese sauce. But we can't find the right recipe.
So we literally need a cheese sauce expert to fix this.
We called one. Vaidehi.
I knew she was the lead project engineer at Forum and the creator of the Base CS and Base DS series. Actually, I learned graph theory from her. She also does the bite-sized video series, but cheese sauce?
That's what I heard. Vaidehi, we're over here. Did you bring your cheese sauce recipe?
I did. I almost forgot it at home, but I remember that's what you asked me to bring. So here it is. I hope it helps.
Oh, it will. It will.
Awesome. Marta can get that going. Actually, I can probably brew some coffee while she's getting started on that. Can I get you anything, Vaidehi?
How about a matcha latte?
Matcha latte. I think I can do that. Do you want your usual cappuccino espresso without any coffee there, Bojan?
Yes.
She finally taught me how to make it.
She never does that with me.
Well, bribery helps.
And one super sweet piece of the cloud for my unicorn.
Righto. I will get that.
With extra rainbows.
Yeah. I will get that started, and I'll join you at the table as soon as I have that.
I heard so many great things about you. Where do we start?
I don't know.
Well, this is the part where you brag. Because Jason told me so many great things about you, and I said, okay, but what is the greatest thing about you, in your opinion?
Honestly, no. I don't know if anyone's ever asked me that. I don't know. I think I'm a jack of all trades, if you will. You know, I think that's probably my greatest talent is that I can learn a lot of things. I can explain things pretty well. I can communicate really effectively, distill ideas and problems down into little like nuggets of information that people can understand. I think that's the best thing about me. Or at least that's what makes me so employable.
Here's your coffee, Vaidehi. And here's yours, Bojan.
Follow-up question, and I have many of them.
Well, I have to say first. I can second her answer, but I would say, I personally think her superpower is compassion. That's what my vote is towards. Not to take away from anything else that you mentioned there, Vaidehi, but
that one's better, honestly.
Yeah, compassion, I think is.
I'm like, I don't know, I can explain things, and you're like, well, you're also like a good person. And I'm like, oh, okay.
It sounds better when somebody else says it.
It does. I have a hard time thinking about, the strengths and weaknesses and evaluating myself. So thank you. I'm glad you just did it for me.
Well, I mean, arguably, when you go in for a job interview and whatever, and someone says, what's your biggest strength? I mean, most of the time we go for the higher ability things. Because you can't go into a job interview and have the person go, so what's your biggest strength? You go, compassion. Like, don't call us, we'll call you. I mean.
Yeah, exactly. We're not trained to think like that. Maybe we should be, though.
Maybe.
Speaking of compassion, tell me your secret about teaching people.
I think there are lots of secrets to teaching, but I would just say probably the biggest one is, just being kind and assuming that the person that you're explaining something to or teaching something to has the capacity to understand. And I think that's that ties into the concept of compassion, where it's like, put yourself in their shoes, and that could be like a little kid, that could be a grown person, that could be somebody who is switching careers and completely new to something and has to learn, their brain doesn't have those neurons fused together yet, right? Like, I think programming is a great example where it's like people of all different backgrounds will learn it. And in our industry in particular, I think sometimes there is a notion of like, it's hard and only certain people can do it. And that's not necessarily true. It is hard, but it's just a process. And I think when it comes to teaching of any kind, it's so important to put yourself in that other person's shoes and understand where they're coming from, and that will actually make you a better teacher. And I think a lot of the times, a lot of people will teach things and think that they're a good teacher because they know it, and that's not what makes you a good teacher. It's whether you can empathize with that other person, whether you can explain things in multiple ways in the way that that person will understand, because people learn differently. And I think that's what makes you a good teacher. It is that compassion and empathy and being able to assume that that person is capable of learning the thing rather than assuming that they're not capable, and if they don't understand the first time, then they're not, smart enough or something.
I can agree with that. I remember back in college, I was a math tutor, and I had a couple of students that were students of this one professor who was referred to as the fossil because he had been there probably for too long, and he had gotten very stuck in a particular rut in how he taught math. And he had a PhD in mathematics, which, as my own math teacher put it, a PhD in mathematics is more of a liability than anything, because you lose the ability to remember what it's like to not understand something, so you teach it from the wrong end. And anyway, I had two of my students who shared the same slot were both in his class, and they came in one day. They said, yeah, the teacher stood up this morning and he said, I don't understand how this isn't making sense to you people. I mean, it makes sense to me. What's wrong with you? And he's teaching like entry level pre-calc here, and it's like, ouch.
Yeah, it's like the teaching version of it works on my machine. It's like, I understand, why don't you understand? And it's like, well, maybe your machine is 20 years old and you've never upgraded anything. Like, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. I used to be like that. I had a bunch of experience with all the crazy stuff, and getting to mentoring people, it was very hard to me. But then I decided to learn French, and I met the most compassionate teacher that exists in the world ever. That woman has limitless patience for me because I cannot pronounce my R's and my grammar sucks. I'm a B1 level, and I've been learning it for 3 days for the last 2.5 years. So, and she never gives up on me. And from her, I learned to always try a different way. It's not a problem in the students if they don't get it. Yeah. It's me. I need to try another way.
Yeah, and I think that's like so important, right? Where it's like, if that light bulb moment isn't happening where they're not understanding, it's not because they're not capable. It's that maybe you're probably not explaining it in the way that they need. And so that's why I think the most effective teachers can recognize that, and they also start to pick up on how different people learn. And so they know how to take the same idea and they understand that idea so deeply that they can explain it visually. They can explain it with metaphors. They can explain it physically with objects. They can explain it with diagrams. They can explain it with analogies, or by talking through something. Like that is a good teacher. And it's so wild when people like, I hate the notion of, if you can't do, you teach. Ugh. Because the people who teach are the ones who actually understand things way better than the people who do a lot of the times, And so
we need to swap that phrase. Those who can't teach just do.
Yeah. That's actually really accurate, because if you can just like build something, but you can't show someone how to build it, and you can't empower them to do it themselves, well, you actually are a little bit more limited. And that's why I think all of us should strive to get those teaching skills, because think about the multiplier you can be when you can amplify other people, right? And I think that also ties into like mentorship and being a good manager, where you're not trying to hold on to your own knowledge and be kind of gatekeepery and say, well, I know it, but you don't deserve to know it. Or if you can't figure it out yourself, you're not good enough. Instead, what you should be doing is, hey, I know this thing. Let me show you how cool it is, and let me like get you excited about it and seize the opportunity to like have that light bulb experience with you. And I think those are the people like I personally want to surround myself with.
Oh, definitely. Although I do have to put a disclaimer, I think, on all that, all of it being true, but I do have to put the disclaimer on it for any students out there who might think, well, okay, so the fact that I'm not, I'm pulling straight C's in my calculus classes because I have a bad professor, or, the fact I'm not advancing, in my understanding of Python is because my supervisor's not mentoring me hard enough. We do still have to put in the work.
Yeah.
It's like you can have the best teacher in the world and not take any advantage of that opportunity to learn. And conversely, you can have the worst teacher in the world and you can still squeeze something out of it. But when you get someone who's willing to learn and someone who's willing to put in the work of teaching and you put them together, I mean, that's fireworks right there.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a good disclaimer. Like it takes two to tango, right? Where you can be really successful on your own or without a teacher. Like in my case, for example, I didn't really have anybody guiding me. I had to figure it out myself. And I'm like, oh, what if there had been somebody? I could have done this in half the amount of time. But there have also been times where I have tried to teach and I've realized like, okay, I've kind of done as much as I can. And, it's kind of up to this person to like now do the work. Because you can't like build the skill for people. You can show them how to, but they have to put in the work. And certain people will do that faster and certain people will take more time with it. And that's just an individual thing.
It's fair, yeah. That of course gets me thinking too. I remember reading somewhere that, and this is certainly true of me, one of the best ways to teach in a company context, to mentor someone, is pair program with them, especially when you're stuck on one of your bugs. If you need to go debugging somewhere, pair program with them. Find the most junior person in the room and go, hey, you want to help me fix this bug?
Yeah, pairing is so great. It's hard when it's like when you have time zones and you're so distributed. I think there's something really special about that about the synchronous experience of, talking through something. But I do also think, there are ways to write about how you think or how you debug something and empower other people to read that and try to get something out of it. But I don't know. I don't think anything really replaces pair programming just because you both go into a situation where no one actually knows the right answer and you're figuring out together. And that's kind of like thrilling where you're like, oh, I don't actually know what's going to happen, but let's figure it out.
It's pretty awesome.
So speaking of how you debug, you just mentioned that. How do you debug? What's your process?
That's a good question. I think it depends. I have sort of like two different modes of debugging, depending on if it's like a high emergency situation or if it's a more relaxed, like, oh, I just don't know why this doesn't work. But I think the main thing that I do going into it is try to check my assumptions. And I think that's the biggest thing that I notice in newer engineers is that a lot of the times you make assumptions and along the way you make an assumption, you make another assumption, you make another assumption. And if you're not actually checking those, then you could be going down a path that's actually not, that's like a red herring. It's not even the right thing to do. And so the biggest practice, the practice that I have for debugging, like all centers around checking my assumptions. And a lot of the times that's me realizing that I thought something was happening and it actually wasn't. And a lot of the times it's also like narrowing down what is happening. And that's something I do in outages. Like whenever there's an emergency situation, I'm the one who's like, is this affecting all of these nodes or is this affecting one? Okay, what is the exact status code? Can you replicate it on this browser or that? Like I'm trying to narrow it down to like try to figure out how to get the answer. And I think a lot of the times that's the way to like in a emergency situation get to the heart of the problem. In a more relaxed situation, I'm like not as intense about it. I'll just be like, all right, let's just check one thing after the other. But I think in outage situations, the quicker you can, do that process of elimination of what is being impacted and what isn't, that's kind of like a superpower to be able to like hone in on the needle in the haystack.
So, print statements, for or against?
Oh, 4.
Oh, this is the first. I want to hear more.
I mean, there's a tweet I saw a couple years ago from Dan Abramov, who's the creator, or he's a core contributor of React. I think he worked on Redux too. He said like console.log, using console.log in JavaScript is like it showcases your experience in like debugging. I'm paraphrasing what the tweet was, but he basically was like, you should use the very basic tools you have to check your assumptions is what he was getting at. And so, logging out things with print statements or, console.logs or whatever it is in whatever language, like that's really powerful because that's like a way of checking that you actually know what's going on in the program. And I think as you become more experienced as an engineer, you can read programs and know what's happening. But in the debugging situations, even if you know what's happening, having that gut check of, let me just confirm that this value is actually there and isn't undefined or is a string and not a number. Like that's really important because those are the types of really annoying things where, it's a bug that's hidden because of an assumption that you made and because of whoever wrote the code, they made the assumption that that wouldn't happen. And if you're not able to like check that with the basic tool of like printing something out or logging it, to some sort of server log, then how do you know? Like you don't have that insight, and you need that insight and some sort of like measurement into what's going on in your program in order to understand why it's not doing what you want it to do.
So the problem, I guess, with most of the bugs, most modern bugs, then, it isn't that we're working on a stack of abstractions, it's that we're working on a stack of assumptions, then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if you think about distributed systems, like how many assumptions are built into distributed systems? Like we assume that latency is like, what is there's like a list of the fallacies of distributed computing. Like we assume the network is reliable. We assume that things won't fail. We assume that latency is 0. And it's like, oh, actually, if you've ever built anything for the web and had it used in any country beyond your own, you know that latency is not 0, So everything that we build now is based on these assumptions, and there are fallacies that we operate within. And it's important to remember, like, the thing you assume is happening is probably not happening, or the thing you assume is not happening might actually be happening.
I experienced that firsthand when I made my first website.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, that was, I think, 17 years ago.
Wow. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I created a really nice website with a 5 megabyte flash animation that always played sound. Put it on the internet, and it works super nice for me in localhost. But people were complaining that it was taking forever to load up. And I was like, why are you complaining? It works super nice on my localhost. Your dial-up, who cares about that?
Yeah, well, and I think assumptions are one of the reasons why, my team at Mousepaw Media is having to build, a game engine, because we want to make games for schools, and none of the game engines that are out there will work on the hardware that most schools have in the U.S., much less abroad.
Yeah.
So we're having to build one that's, that doesn't make the same assumptions about hardware. It's like it works on the older hardware, it works on low memory environments, things like that. Single core CPUs, handling resources better. But the process of trying to build something like that, I actually got so tired of trying to figure out what was happening, because I do a lot of work with raw pointers in C++, because when you're dealing with manual memory management, in trying to create more, you're trying to create more efficient algorithms, whatever, you're going to wind up using manual memory management, and not the smart pointers either, because they don't work if you're trying to build your own data structure. Sorry, they don't. And and I actually wound up building a tool. That let me dump memory on the screen. Like literally, I could just do a print statement and dump the address and the memory in hexadecimal on the screen. It's called Owlsqueak if anyone wants to download this thing. And it's just, I could just dump it right to the screen. And it figures out, I don't have to tell it what it is. I just have to throw it a pointer, and just goes dump, and just spits it out based on the size of the object. And so it's scary smart about it, but I cannot tell you how many times that has saved my hide. Just being able to go, why is this not making sense? I don't understand. I'm storing this value, but what's it? And then I look and I do the memory dump and go, that's not what I put in there. Oh, wild pointer. I know what's going on, and I can go back and I can. Well, Bojan and I have said a couple of times, you can give a programmer a $6,000 piece of debugging software, and they will still go back to the print statements.
So you both are pro print statements too?
I probably could be more pro print statements than I think I am. I think sometimes we do underestimate what some debuggers can do, like especially in Python. Learn PDB, because it's wonderful to be able to actually manipulate the variables at runtime. You can still see the values, but you can also manipulate them. So learning the tools is good, but I even ticked off a few of my technical editors because I put in dead simple Python, to try and get out of the habit of only relying on print statements for debugging. But I do think you make a good point that there's still that's still the most elementary way to solve. Debuggers don't work everywhere.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing I would say, if I could put an asterisk on my point from earlier, if you have other tools, try learning them. But if they don't work, or if they're not as advanced in a language or in a framework, you can always fall back on, the very basic, just print out what the value is strategy.
What I really love about print statement is that you can very easily turn them into console.debug and just throw them on the server. And if something goes wrong, just turn on the flag. Right away you get useful log files.
Exactly, yeah. Well, and I want to do the same thing with IOSqueak, is that it is not itself a full-blown logging system, it's a message routing system. So when you print, it doesn't just spit it into cout and die. It actually throws it into a queue that you can connect, that cout is connected to, but you can connect other things to it, and you can route it based on priority and based on category or whatever. And so you can write your own logging system around this, because the whole idea was we need to be able to put these in and leave them in. Sometimes. And so being able to put in some of those debug statements, and to have, anytime you have a tool that lets you do that, like the logging in Python, for example, where you can just, instead of the print statements, you want to do logging, you want to use your logging module, because then you can, it still prints it ultimately, but then you can shut off debug, and you can leave them in place.
The routing seems nice, especially to be able to, I don't know, I love categorizing things and prioritizing things. So I'm like, oh, that seems nifty. If I could categorize all these things that are being spit out, and make some sense of them, that'd
Absolutely.
be nice.
Well, since this is turning into an accidental commercial from my library, I should also mention you can do the attributes and the colors on it too. You don't have to memorize the ANSI codes.
Colors are a big thing.
Yeah. They're wonderful. So yeah, it was a lot of fun writing it. It sounds so elementary. Sometimes I come up with this stuff and I just think, why? I'm sure people have already thought of this. Why, why do I think this is original? And then I go look, and no one's really done it this way. Because I think because we do tend to content ourselves with what's already there, and we think, I hate the phrase. Maybe you can weigh in on this, Vaidehi. I hate the phrase "don't reinvent the wheel." Because a lot of times the wheel really needs reinvention, because it's still made of stone.
Yeah. I mean, I like building on good solutions, but not every solution is going to work for every situation, right? Solutions are created for certain people's needs to fit whatever they need, and it's sort of the same thing when you're weighing what framework or what language to use. Not everything about every language is going to work for you, or not everything about a framework is going to be perfect. You just kind of have, I don't know, software is about trade-offs, I guess, is where I'm going.
Unless you're using Rust. Rust is good for every situation, every time, without exceptions.
I do love Rust. I do. I fight with its compiler. I mean, I haven't written it in a while now, in a couple of years, but my overwhelming memory was, wow, this is fast, and wow, this compiler is really difficult. But that's probably my own limitation, not the compiler's fault.
I watched the exact same thing. I was watching someone do something in Rust, and he was, he knew Rust, whereas I didn't, and he's just trying to figure out how to convert from an integer to a string, and I'm just sitting there watching. The thing is, I have to cast this. I have to cast this thing to this thing here. It's like casting 9 different things. I'm sitting here going, string to int. How hard would that have been? String to int.
Strings are weird in Rust. That's my other memory. It's like people are like, oh, you learn about strings later. And I was like, really? Isn't really? And they're like, yeah, strings are weird. We'll come back to that. And I was like, that does not bode well.
It definitely doesn't. And then they say it's going to replace C++. I'm thinking, let's see, standard string or a world of pain. Standard string or a world of pain. I hate it when anyone says, well, X is dead or X is going to replace Y. It's like, no, usually the rumors of the death were greatly exaggerated most of the time. Ruby is dead, apparently. There have been several articles about it, and yet it keeps putting out releases, darn it.
In that PHP, like...
Hi, Bug Hunters Café. Marta speaking. Yes, we're still open 24/7. You can find us at bughunters.cafe and on Twitter, Dev, and Instagram as Bug Hunters Café. I don't understand what you are saying. Wait just a second. Joanna, can you come over here?
Just a second. Hello. Oh yes, we're working on fixing that right now. It's the temporal stabilizer. Stabilizer, yes. No, we won't be needing a new flux capacitor. Oh, you still have a question for Marta. She'll be right with you. Okay, bye.
I appreciate that, Doc. But no, you can hang onto that spare. Oh, and could you ask Marty to return my jacket next time you're out this way? Thanks, Doc. Have a good day.
Vaidehi, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
How do you increase the productivity of a software team? Wrong answers only.
Do you actually want wrong answer?
Yes.
I feel like that's me telling you what not to do. I mean, I guess if I take the question on face value of how to actually increase productivity, I would say it's centered around making sure that engineers have questions answered before they go into implementing whenever possible. And I think there's like just a lot of back and forth in engineering teams of like, why don't we do it this way? And why did we choose this? And it just like derails the entire development process for that individual person, but then also for teams, because that can kind of devolve into like fighting about adding one dependency or, doing it this way and why, and why didn't you consider this other dependency? And like, it just like turns into
React Angular.
Yeah. It just turns into like this big bike shedding moment where nothing actually gets done, or if things get done, it's like painful. It's like pulling teeth because you're just like, oh, there's going to be like a contentious discussion about this. And then you have the other side where, there's just like a benevolent dictator where they're just like, we're doing this and you don't have a say in it, which also is like kind of demoralizing. You don't want that in a software team either. So I think the way to really empower software teams to be effective is to come to consensus early on and, be okay with the fact that not everyone's going to agree, but commit to something and then go forth to implement. And I think like you see this in a lot of open source projects where they have this concept of RFCs, requests for comments, where, you have a lot of discussion around implementation and design and motivation and drawbacks of why to do something and how to do it. And I think a lot of the times if you can front load that so that no engineer is like sitting there halfway done with their work, or having to argue with other people about why something should be done a certain way. If you can have those conversations earlier, I think it actually makes the development process a lot easier. But that's just also from my own experience. I've been in those teams where it's like I didn't have enough information to complete the task, or I went and completed the task, and then, you know, it goes for PR review and someone's like, actually, I don't like this design. Let's completely redo it. And I'm like, what a waste. Like, well, shouldn't we have discussed this before? Like, I don't really care. You can design it whatever way you want, but like, why did this seems like a waste of resources. And I get really frustrated when I see like inefficiencies and processes like that.
Just to be clear, that was the right answer, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my right answer. There's probably many right answers, but I think there are some wrong answers that I kind of also tried to hit at, which is don't like derail your engineers by making them fight it out because nobody gave them clear direction or clear vision. And then also don't have like some, you know, saint on a mountain just telling people what to do without ever hearing them either. It's somewhere in the middle.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell if it's all right. I want to tell you kind of what I do at my with my team and get your feedback, because I was like seeing where I can improve. So what we've done historically is we have most of our leadership roles are like this voluntary thing, so that we don't have people who get promoted to management to where they don't get to code anymore. But it's a role that they can voluntarily step into, say, I think I'd like to do this. Management goes, yeah, we agree. And so they do it for a little while, and then they can step back out of it at will without taking a hit to their advancement through the company. It's a role you take on temporarily, not a promotion that you get with money. But that also means that we figure out our standards through what we call the standards board, which is also voluntary. And at the start of each quarter, if we have proposals sitting, we just say, hey, who wants to be on the standards board this time? And we have an X number of slots open. And then, you know, some people go, oh yeah, I'd like to, and I'd like to do it. And, oh yeah, I'd like to. And we just kind of do a first come kind of basis on that. And then, you know, the people who are on the standards board will meet and we'll just have a formal discussion about, okay, so here's this proposal, here's this proposal, here's this proposal. And we'll usually run polls with the developers beforehand so they can, you know, give their feedback. And we had to settle tabs versus spaces this way. And we did. And the funny thing is that, you know, we were able to do it without anybody losing their mind over bracketed style or tabs versus spaces. Some people were totally okay doing tabs even though they prefer spaces because we had a reason. It's like, well, we want to do this because of X, Y, Z. And so between the poll, the informal poll, and then the standards board meeting, we were able to, you know, finalize, oh yes, we're using tabs because it made sense for what we were doing. That's what we've been doing over the last few years. Are there any problems you could see with that, or does that sound like a viable way of solving it?
I mean, it sounds very similar to what I'm kind of describing, where it's like, you know, it comes to a consensus. Not everybody's going to like it, but you know there's a decision and you know that there's a reason for it, and I think that helps. I like that you, in your process, it sounds like you say, well, this is why. And, you know, 50% of you might not agree, or whatever, 20% of you who really wanted spaces, you know, you might not get it, but we're not all going to agree on something, but you know the reason. It's not just like blindly, like somebody decided one day and decided it is true, you know? So I like that part. And it sounds similar to what we do at Forum now. We didn't previously used to do that. And I think the only thing that is kind of different between our process and what you're describing is that we just have a bit more product development to it, where when you're weighing proposals, you're sort of like, what aligns with the product and what it needs right now. That's the only additional thing. But it sounds like your process works. And I think that's the biggest thing, is like, I'm never going to be too, you know, I'm never going to be like very rigid about processes, because I think the best process is the one that works for the individuals at the company and on the team. And processes are there to help us do our job. They don't have feelings. They don't have opinions. It's people who have feelings and opinions, and you want the process to support people and what they do. So,
Agile methodology has opinions in and of itself.
It shouldn't, at least. Like, a process shouldn't have strongly held opinions, and you shouldn't be, you know, your world shouldn't grind to a halt because of a process. Like, I don't believe in that. So I guess it's sort of like my opinion on frameworks too. I'm never going to say that one framework is the best, because I don't believe that. I think it's like which one works for you.
Yeah, every tool has its purpose. Every tool has its use. We talk a lot actually about the fact that bugs originate in teams before they originate in code. You know, that teams have bugs, and it's that I brought this up a couple in some other conversations about that law that if you have a 3-part team, you're going to get a 3-pass compiler.
I haven't heard that before. That's interesting.
Oh,
what does that
really?
mean?
You haven't? Yeah, it's that the projects tend to take on the attributes of the team. I'm trying to find the quote here. But is that, you know, the way a team works tends to reflect itself in the it's Conway's law. It tends to, you know, the structure of the project tends to mirror the structure of the organization, but that would, I think the corollary then would be if there's a flaw in the structure of the team, then that reflects itself in the flaws that a project can wind up having.
That's true. I will co-sign. I didn't know I haven't heard the quote, but I have experienced that exact thing.
It's a weird. Yeah, the formal quote is any organization that designs a system will produce a design whose structure is a copy of their organization's communication structure. So if you have, and then Eric Raymond was the one who said if you have 4 groups working on a compiler, you get a 4-pass compiler. You know, that's kind of was his take on it. So, you know, with that said, since bugs have the possibility of originating from that, how do you structure a team to communicate effectively?
That's a hard question. I think it depends on the team size and whether you're synchronous or asynchronous, because different modes of communication will work better if you're in person than if you're not. Yeah, can my answer just be it depends?
Probably. That's fine. That's valid. Actually, I'm laughing because when you mentioned synchronous and asynchronous, the thought immediately popped into my head. Wait a minute, we just moved towards distributed teams being a major thing in the last 5 years, and what else has become a major thing in the last 5 years? Everybody's making asynchronous projects, microservices, all that. Asynchrony is everywhere, and that seems to have mirrored the fact that we've all gone remote.
Yeah.
You're right. I'd never noticed that before.
I hadn't either. It's interesting.
That's spooky. We're making all sorts of amazing discoveries here.
So, meetings. How do you organize those? I don't think I met a single person that loves meetings.
Yeah, I don't know. I get Zoom fatigue. Maybe it's just because we're in a pandemic and I just don't care about Zoom anymore. It's just like, do we really need this meeting? I am in a lot of meetings these days, and I keep my Fridays and my Mondays meeting free, and that is the best thing ever. It's like it gives me my brain space to actually do deep focus work. But I don't know. I think you have to give yourself like time between those meetings to actually be effective, and like give yourself those dedicated hours to actually get work done, because the context switching just kills you. You know, it's like getting only 30 minutes or an hour in a day to actually go do something productive is I don't know, for me it never seems to work. It's very hard for me to actually get deep into something, so those long uninterrupted hours are the best.
So meetings, avoid them, basically, is the short form of the
yeah, I think like if you're having them, make sure you really need them. Like, make sure you can't communicate it in a thread or an email or over GitHub or whatever. And sometimes they're valid. Like sometimes you can share information so much faster when it's synchronous. But sometimes when there's no agenda, it's like, did we really need to spend 30 minutes doing this? So I will be the first person to be like, what's the agenda? If there's no agenda, do we need this? Because I'm just like, let's all get our time back.
Absolutely. I think Zoom's actually been something of a, I mean, yes, it's allowed us to work remotely, but it's also something of a curse, because it's become so much easier for meeting obsessed people to organize meetings.
Yeah. I think everybody's really tired of Zoom. Personally, it's just like there was a time like where I think people realize like everything could be a quick call, like quickly sync up, and then you have enough sync ups, and then you're like, why do we need so many sync ups? So it's like the pendulum swinging backwards and forwards. So we'll see. I don't know. I think like communication's important, especially when communication's important all the time, but when you're building software, there's just like expectations that need to be clarified and assumptions that need to be checked. And sometimes that's really easy to do in a meeting, but it's not always necessary.
Going back to Conway's Law, I realized one other thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of projects have this flaw where they over communicate within the code, like where they're storing way too much or they're passing way too much data, and there's no, or even classes have the designer storing everything, and there's like almost over communication between parts of the code instead of isolating it out and what does this part do, what does that part do. It's like it tries to over communicate, and I almost wonder if that's kind of a Conway bug, because there's there is such a thing as over communication on a team. And actually, amending that a little bit, I would find it fascinating if we were to look at which projects have God classes, and whether or not the teams responsible for those projects tend to overmeet. Because
I think over communicating and over meeting are two different things in a way, because on a distributed team, I think actually over communication is good because you have so much room for miscommunication. You don't have like body language, you don't have tone. You can say a single sentence and you assume the other person knows the other things you're thinking. So especially on a fully distributed team, I haven't ever seen somebody communicate too much, but in meetings I think that's definitely possible, where people just say the same thing for 15 minutes in a circle, and you're just like, all right, what's the thesis statement, like let's move it along.
And of course, if you're like me, you can't find the thesis statement to save your life. I have a glitch. I can't get to the point for anything, and it's from the head injury. I just work around it, but it's like I have to hem in my point until I finally find it.
Yeah, it's a skill, I think, too. It's like it's a thing you have to practice. It's not easy to do, to get to the heart of things, right? It's not something that's necessarily natural.
Yeah, we need more cactus meetings. Lots of points. So you mentioned one of your passions is non-traditional paths into tech. I think there's a lot of people who think that they have to go to college. I used to think. I remember when I was starting to try and build a game, and I remember my mom saying, you should program it. You should learn programming. I'm like, no, you have to have a CS degree to know programming. Only smart people know programming, and I'm not that smart. She's like, no, here's a book. I think you can do it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mom. But, talk a little bit about that. I mean, the non-traditional paths into tech. Like, how do you get into this? Especially, how do you get into this and actually find a job? Because clearly there's plenty of tutorials, but those don't necessarily translate to employment.
Yeah. There's lots of ways you could do it. I would say that the characteristics that I see amongst people who are in tech and who don't have a CS degree and who came from a non-traditional background are usually just like people who have a lot of grit, who are okay with failing and not knowing something, and picking themselves up, dusting themselves off, and continuing on. I think there are also people who have built things for the fun of it, like just either like as a side project, or they built like a portfolio website and they're excited about it. Like they built things in code school or at a previous job or something, where they have like a genuine excitement about what they did. And I think that's a really good methodology to like getting into the field, which is just like try building something, like try solving a problem for yourself that you're excited about, rather than going through a tutorial, because tutorials are so like limited in scope and you may not be excited about it. But if you decide you want to put a spinner on the page and that you're really excited about that, you will figure out a way to do it. And it might be terrible code, but you will do it. And there's something really validating and empowering about that. So I think those are two things I've seen in people who entered with a non-traditional background. And they're also very good, I think, at like teaching themselves things too, because there's a lot of that has to happen.
So you're saying once I get 5 years into programming, I still have to learn new things?
I'm saying you got to keep doing that indefinitely.
Oh my gosh, but I thought that once you become a senior programmer, that's it. Like, there's no level up from there.
You've arrived. No, I've seen a few threads, some of them on Dev, about, it's okay to just do coding as a job, and I think I would say I think it's okay, but it's going to be really hard to advance if it's only a job and you're not passionate about it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, not everyone can spend their entire weekend hacking on a project, but if the only place that you find yourself building anything interesting is if somebody's paying you for it, then it does get hard. It's not impossible to advance, but I think it's harder to advance because you can't really do that off-roading on most work assignments. They won't let you for practical reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, like, I don't know that you need to be like obsessed with programming and like do it all in your spare time. Like, I wouldn't say that you need to be passionate, like, to the point where you just contribute to open source every weekend and do this and that. Like, I don't think that's healthy.
No.
But I do think that you should have like an interest in figuring things out, in asking questions about like why something's happening and getting to the bottom of things. And I think it is possible to do it in your day job if you have a good day job. I think it probably depends on the environment, but I think the bigger thing that I like want to get at is that you should have some excitement to learn, because you're going to have to keep doing that, to Bojan's point, right? Where you have to keep on learning in this field. Like, that's just part of the job. So you should have some willingness and like some strategy for how you learn new things, because you can get to a senior developer in 5 years, but then what happens when that framework is no longer used and you have to go learn something else? Like that, if you want to be employable in this industry, you need to be ready to go learn something else when the time comes, or, find some new technology and make it work with other technologies, stuff like that.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How do you learn new stuff? You, especially.
I am a visual learner, so I think through things by writing them down and by like literally drawing them out, and that helps me get a grasp on things. Like, I'm always going to be the person who takes notes on something and then draws a couple diagrams and then has like these crazy notes where I'm like trying to connect 3 ideas together. So that's the way that I learn, and I actually will learn something better if I explain it to someone too. So I think part of my learning process is trying to understand it, trying to write it out and explain it the way that I understand it, and then trying to explain it to someone else. And I think that's part of the reason why I think I write a lot of things down in the form of, blog posts or whatever, where it's my way of teaching myself. And then part of the challenge is I understand how this works, but I want to write it in a way that anybody can understand it. And if I can't do that, then that is my sign to myself, oh, you don't actually understand this. You need to go understand this better. It's actually something that I think there's Richard Feynman has a technique called the Feynman technique, and that's I realize that's effectively what that technique is. I never knew that that's what I was doing, but that's what he recommends doing too. Is like teaching or explaining something or teaching something to someone else as part of your own learning. And if you can't explain it in the simplest language without jargon and terminology, that means you actually don't know it. So it forces you to not rely on acronyms and terms as the way to explain something. It forces you to actually know the actual concept. And I think that's so important when you're learning like the fundamentals. I think a lot of the times you'll look at textbooks or you'll watch lectures where people are just throwing acronyms through there. They're just like, oh yeah, blah, 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 AST. And you're like, what is that? And if they can't explain that to you, then how are you ever going to understand what they're talking about in reference to that if they're building on a concept? So I think in
The
my
DOA of the MIA and of the MIT of the EIEIL. And my friend Fox was sitting in a networking class one time, and the professor was reading a section out of the book, and it was like, he said it was just acronyms and prepositions. That was it. And the professor reads the paragraph and he stops and he's staring at the book trying to understand what it is he just read, because he's looking at it going, how did that even make sense? And Fox pipes up from the back of the class. The sad part is, we all understood that.
I mean, it's sad that you have to go and figure out how to understand that, because I would not venture to say that that's learning. That's, to some extent, that's memorizing acronyms. You know?
Yeah. In AWS, that's super awesome, because for every 3-letter combination, there's a service, and you need to memorize it. ACS, AKS,
EIEIO. Yeah. Well, and it gets worse when the acronyms start nesting, like they do with the GNU project. You know, they have, it's like you have GIMP, but then you have GTK, and so GIMP is the GNU image manipulation project. Of course, GNU is an acronym. Don't ask me what it means. And then the GTK is the GIMP toolkit. And it's like they start nesting. It's like, would you stop?
Yeah.
It's acronyms all the way down.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we always like to ask this question, Vaidehi. What is the weirdest bug you've ever encountered?
Okay, this is a weird bug that I've encountered recently. I can tell you that story. I honestly can't remember the weirdest ones. I remember the ones that emotionally scarred me the most. Like, I don't know if they were weird. I just know that I will never forget the experience of going through them. And they were, like, really innocuous. So, like, the ones that emotionally scarred me, looking back now, I'm like, oh, it wasn't that bad. I was just fairly new to the industry, and I brought down the site. And so I was like, oh, no, this is terrible. But it was really innocuous. Like, looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, of course that would have done that. But I can tell you about weird recent bugs. I try not to keep that in my brain cache. You know, like, I personally will hold on to the bugs that left an impression on me. And then there are just weird bugs that I've seen where I'm like, oh, man, that seems like normal. Computers are weird. They're going to do what you tell them to do, you know?
They violate the laws of physics regularly, so what's a weird recent bug?
So there's an interesting bug that happened recently where we had a high traffic... Well, we had a page on our site that had like a post, and there was a button on it where you could actually subscribe, and there was like front end aspects to it. There was JavaScript, and then there was a request that would go to the back end and actually update the database. And there was a day where this page went live, and an email was sent out that linked to that page. So all of a sudden it became very high traffic, and we saw a whole bunch of really odd validation errors coming through to the front end, because users were reporting them, and they're like, oh, it says that this already exists, and I already have this subscription. It's odd. And I was like, how can that be possible? Because we weren't seeing them on the back end necessarily, or sometimes we were seeing them. It wasn't consistent. So at first it looked like something was maybe wrong with the UI. But then, I thought about it. I was like, maybe it's a JavaScript issue. But then we also saw a ton of latency in the requests that were going to the back end. And then I was like, maybe it's actually a back end issue. And then at some point, I think we were like trying to make heads and tails of the whole thing. At some point I was like, I think we just thought maybe it's related to their internet connection. like there's no consistency. Like maybe these users are physically located in a place where the request is just really slow. And eventually we figured out that there were two things going on. The backend itself that was receiving the request was slow, but not necessarily because of all the traffic. It was slow on its own because the request included an update to the database, and that update was slow, just for any request. Now, if you couple that with high traffic, now this got even worse, because now you have tons of requests coming into the back end, and each request makes this kind of slow update to the database, and you have all of them happening at once. And then we also figured out there was a JavaScript issue on the front end, a really innocuous one, which is that when the request was fast, you could click the button and you just like immediately saw that the thing, the button you clicked submitted the request and everything was fine. But when the request was slow, we didn't ever show like a spinner. We didn't show anything that indicated to the user that anything had happened. So we had users who were getting emailed a link to go to this site. They would click the button. They wouldn't see anything. So they'd click it again. They'd click it again. They'd click it again. But through no fault of their own, because we didn't, on the UX, we didn't ever render like, hey, your request is submitting, or the button is disabled, or, a spinner or something. Nothing. We didn't do anything. So these poor users are like, why is nothing happening? Why is nothing happening? And then they get an error that says, this already exists. And obviously they were confused. So usually that wouldn't have been an issue if the request itself was fast. But when the request is slow and you have tons of users coming to the site at the same time, and they're like getting antsy and they're wondering like, why isn't anything happening? This is like when we got this influx of people just reporting like, hey, this doesn't work. Why did you email us about it? Obviously something's broken. And so eventually what we figured out is that their requests actually would succeed in the database. It would actually update the database, but if they're submitting like 5 requests, the first one would succeed, the next 4 wouldn't, because the thing already exists in the database, and the database would be like, hey, validation error, and that would get surfaced back to the user. So once we figured it out, it was like a twofold solution. We updated the back end to make it faster, and we updated the front end to show like, a spinner or like a text that said submitting, please don't keep submitting. Like we got your request, cool, just wait. And like the biggest lesson I learned of that is like UX is actually really, really important, and you shouldn't assume that the way that the page or the request behaves, like the speed of it and the response you get will always be the response you get and will always be the speed that every user has. And it was kind of like an interesting distributed systems programming problem where it was like latency, again, is not always 0. So how does your site handle that? How do these services deal with situations where you have high traffic or really slow latency? And what is it like for the user to actually experience that? So that was the weirdest bug I encountered, mostly because I think at some point I kind of threw my hands up and I was like, how is it possible for it to be on the back end but not look like that on the front end? And it took some like, multifaceted debugging where I had to look at what was going on the page and then also look at what was going on the back end and try to make sense of it.
That classic classic concept that a bug is anything that is surprising to the user.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and now I'm just like, anytime I QA something for someone, I just like go into like the Rails controller and I'll just put like a sleep 15 and be like, okay, what happens? And like play around and be like, what happens when this is slow? Like, because I think we as programmers, especially when we're working locally or when we're working with services that are really fast for us, we assume it's going to be like that for everybody. And when you think about people all around the world on mobile devices, on machines that might have a different hardware or on different browsers, they might not have the same experience. And if you really want your user experience to be truly inclusive, you have to think about that. And it's so easy for programmers to just be like, well, it works on my machine, or, the site responded in like 200 milliseconds when I submitted the button, but obviously it's not always going to do that. So it's sort of like making sure you have defensive programming techniques. And I don't know, I relearn that lesson all the time in different ways, and I try to remember it. And sometimes I'm debugging other people's code, so I realize pretty quickly like, oh, this is where we missed, we didn't think about this. We made an assumption here that it would always be this fast, or that 500 people wouldn't click this button at the same time.
Which, well, one way to get around that assumption, by the way, I should note, is install VirtualBox. If you're doing like application development, install VirtualBox. Throttle the heck out of the RAM. See how well you can run in 1 gig of RAM.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, is it actually going to work? There's a website called 56k-emulator.co.uk, and it is a dial-up emulator. And
wow.
You just plug in the address, and it will simulate visiting that website through dial-up. It's kind of a slow, lazy approach the way they did it, with PHP, but it strips out all the script tags and then loads them one by one, so that so you see what the website's like on a slow internet connection, mm-hmm. and it's there's just find those sorts of tools that let you really throttle back the available resources and see if your stuff still works. So that, like you said at the beginning, challenge your assumptions. Or as Jeff Atwood puts it, do terrible things to your code.
Yeah.
Vaidehi, this has been a pleasure as always.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It was a fun conversation.
So, and I think they got the temporal stabilizer about fixed. What was that? What was in the cheese sauce that makes that work so well?
Oh, that's a secret I'll never tell.
Oh, darn.
You're a wonderful guest, and I was so happy to meet you.
Thank you. You both are wonderful hosts. I love this.
Yeah.
Oh.
This is a lot of fun having you here.
Let's see if this new cheese sauce works then. Oh, there we go. Bug Hunters Café. This is Marta. Yes, we are located online at bughunters.cafe and on Twitter, Dev, and Instagram as Bug Hunters Café. Oh, that! Yes, we just fixed our temporal stabilizer. How long were you trying to land? Oh my, I'm sorry for the trouble. We should be stable now. I'm glad you like it. Our music is provided by audionautics.com. Well, I'll have your usual waiting for you. We just got an order of jelly babies. Custard, we have. Not sure about the fish fingers. I'll have to check in back. You're welcome. See you soon.